Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Face of the Enemy, which is episode 14 of season 6 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my Patreon user polls. The episode to win my latest patron poll is the Next Generation episode, Face of the Enemy. So Face of the Enemy is the episode where Counselor Troi wakes up and finds herself disguised as Romulan on a Romulan ship, coerced by Navek, a Romulan involved in Spock's underground movement, to help them transport some important Romulan dissidents out of Romulan space and into the Federation. However, complications arrive in the mission as she masquerades as a Romulan Tal Shiar agent, and eventually she's forced to improvise and beam the dissidents to the Enterprise, which has her and her associate Navek get discovered, which results in his execution. However, she's managed to escape as the Enterprise beams her away as the Romulan ship departs. So, this has always been one of my favorite episodes. From the very first time I saw it, I always thought of it as one of the higher upper echelon of episodes, and it's one of the reasons why I love season 6. Like, I think later season 6 just knocks it out of the park week to week, which is why it's one of my favorite seasons. Now, this is what I always thought growing up, but in more recent years, I've found that this episode is actually a bit polarized. Like, some people don't like it, and some people really do like it, which kind of surprised me because I always thought it was one of the most regarded episodes. But I think overall it is fairly high regarded. It's just there are a fair amount of detractors. Now, part of what makes this episode so great is the style, the music, the acting, the way it's the editing, like the way it's cut together, the way it's performed. This is one of the more stylistic episodes of Star Trek, which is something they did a bit more in season 6. I love season 3. In fact, season 3 of TNG is my favorite season of the show. I will state that up and down. But like, season 3 and 4 are a bit more stilted in the way it's cut together. Even though I do love some of the music, especially from season 4, it's more straightforward, and especially the way it's shot is more of a typical, multicam TV production way, a bit less stylistic, where this episode comes off as a lot more stylistic in terms of its music and its editing. And I think the music is a huge part of why I like this episode so much. Now, I've talked before about music and also mentioned how I typically prefer more subtle music that's just there in the background and adds atmosphere. However, this music could be described as more intrusive. However, I think it really works for this episode in particular, and particularly it's just the way it's used is used so well to raise the tension and the stakes of the episode. And then the other element of this, of course, is the acting. So I did a video a few years back about my top 10 favorite Star Trek actors and my top 5 least favorite Star Trek actors. Now, to say that I got a lot of comments disagreeing with me is a bit of an understatement. However, that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their different opinions, which is all good. However, of course, some people were less than civil about it, and that's not okay. You don't need to call me names because my opinion happens to be different than yours. But the response I got the most, the criticism I got the most about what they disagreed with, was they felt like a lot of people felt like Marina Sirtis should be on my worst list. And that is something I absolutely disagree with. I think watching this episode in particular, there's no way I could put her on my worst list because I think her acting is phenomenal. And frankly, I think she is a good actress, and a lot of issues people had with her acting had more to do with bad writing. I think the Next Generation cast was not very, or writing staff particularly in the first couple of seasons, were not very good at writing for female characters, and I think the staff, even though they got progressively better throughout the seasons, were still never all that good of writing for Counselor Troi specifically. And I feel like even the best of actors cannot save bad writing. Like, if you ever seen Patrick Stewart in an Emoji Movie, you know what I'm talking about. And I think when she is given material that is actually good and decent, she does a good job. Now, this isn't the only example in Next Generation of that happening. I think there's a lot of examples that we have of her giving a great performance when the writing is actually good. But this is by far the best example of that, because the writing is actually outstanding in this episode. And unless if she was the bad actor that many people claimed her to be, then this episode would have fell apart, because it is dependent on a good performance and a good delivery, and she absolutely 100% delivers on that, and this is why this episode is such a success. And it proves to me that she is in fact a good actor who is just given bad material for a lot of the time. And you can tell this, like, the way, again, this is like a combination of great writing and great acting, because the way it's performed, where Counselor Troi first wakes up and she has no idea how she was there. She never signed up for any of this and is very, like, confused, and her life is constantly in danger. Like, she's doing this under complete duress. She never, like, signed up for it, and she's being asked to operate as an undercover agent, which is something that she's never been trained to do. And so you can really sense her uncomfortableness with having to be thrust in this situation, and how her progression through the episode of her becoming more and more comfortable and more used to this situation really comes off on her performance. And I absolutely believe if this material was given to an actor who was not that capable, who was not that good, then they would not be able to perform it, to actually execute it, which she absolutely does. I think her performance here is absolutely amazing. You can tell her progression of how uncomfortable she is, and especially in that first scene where she's forced to interact with the Romulan commander, and how she's really comes off as unsure of herself, but trying to, act the part because her fucking life depends on it. But then as the episode progresses, the more comfortable she gets, the more used she gets to the situation. Now, another thing I really have to praise this episode for is the subtle use. It's there if you see it, of Deanna Troi's empathic abilities, because that is something many writers neglect or miswrite, which is why a lot of people criticize and comment on how Counselor Troi's empathic abilities are inconsistent throughout the show, and that the main thing is saying that her empathic abilities work or don't work depending on what the plot requires, which is true. And again, that's chalked up to bad writing. That's just chalked up to different writers coming in and some not knowing how to write for Deanna Troi and ignoring her empathic abilities because it's not convenient for the plot that they're trying to tell. However, here, her empathic abilities aren't forgotten and, in fact, are explored in a very subtle way. Now, they are called attention to at the start of the episode when Nivek first abducts Deanna Troi, because he flat out says, "You are an empath. Am I lying?" when he expresses that she has to perform this or her life is in danger, or that he is working for the Romulan Underground, she's flat out like, "No, you're not lying." He's like, "Well, there you go." So it sets this reminder, and a gentle reminder that she has these empathic abilities, but it's not like called attention to constantly or ever again throughout this episode. But if you look for it, it's there. You can tell through her interactions, particularly with the Romulan commander, that she is using and relying on those empathic... Commander Torith, that's her name. So you can tell with her interactions with Commander Torith that she is relying on those empathic abilities to try to read her and figure out what her correct response should be. In fact, I think they really sell the fact that Deanna Troi is not trained as an undercover operative, and the fact that she's dependent on these empathic abilities is what gives her a slight edge, even though, because she has no training to fall back on, that allows her to fulfill the role of what Major Rakal. That's the identity she's impersonating of the Tal Shiar. And I absolutely love the dinner scene where Torith is kind of, because she really doesn't get along with Raquel and has a really negative opinion of Tal Shiar, and Deanna Troi is able to absolutely fill in the role of defending the Tal Shiar, even though she knows virtually nothing about them. And you can tell that she's relying on her empathic abilities, the emotional reaction of Toreth and the others around her, to dictate exactly how she should behave. And actually, this is mentioned earlier when after Deanna Troi's first encounter with Toreth, because when she goes back to Nivek in private, she even says, like, they're all terrified of me. So again, a really subtle, really nice, really cool, gentle reminder that she is using her empathic abilities to dictate, because she can sense their fear and she knows it's telling her exactly how to react in this situation in order to survive. And I love that. One of my favorite scenes in this episode that I thought was absolutely amazing was when they encountered the Enterprise, and Counselor Troi wanted to contact the Enterprise in order to use this opportunity to rescue the dissidents. And Nivek was very much against it. And he's like, no, we should just go to whatever planet they were planning on going to, Draken 4 or whatever it was, and just ignore this. But Counselor Troi is like, stood up to him and like was like, I will have you ejected into space. Do you hear me, Sub Commander? That was such an amazing performance. Anyone who says Marina Sirtis is a bad actor after watching this scene is just crazy and objectively wrong as well. What an amazing performance. The way she was like, and she points out a lot of like very true things, and I love, because it also shows how more confident she's getting, because at first she's like very dazed and confused and doesn't know where she is and just like fighting to stay alive, but now she's like had enough. And it's also such an amazing character moment for this character. It's like one of the best character moments. So much character development in just this one episode, where she takes control. She says, no, you have abducted me, put me in danger, surgically altered me without any of this, without my permission, and now you're gonna fucking listen to me. And that was such a great moment. And I also gotta talk about the actor who plays Nivek. He's also a great actor who also helps sell these interactions, because I love his reaction in this moment, because he's always like in control and firm with her, and then when she reacts like this, at first she's like, counselor, listen to me. And she's like, no! And she goes on, and when she like yells at him, says, I will have you ejected into space. Is that clear, Sub-Commander? The way he just looks at her like like the shock on his face, because he knows that she in fact has all the power in this situation, and so he acquiesces to her and agrees to work with her on the situation. That's such an amazing scene. But yeah, the actor who played Nivek would also go on to play I'm blanking on his name, but the main Xindi reptilian villain, who was the main villain for season 3 of Enterprise, and he also did a really good job in that situation. I just really like this. He also played a Jim Hadar in this one episode of Hippocratic Oath on DS9, who also did a great job there. I just like this actor. He also had like a cameo in the pilot episode of Voyager as a crew member who just disappeared, but that was kind of a generic performance. Scott McDonald, that's his name. Yes, yeah, it was really good good performer. Anyway, yeah, so the interaction between these two is great. But we also have another good guest actor. And that's the other thing that Star Trek is, particularly Next Generation Voyager, falls flat on, is having guest actors who are good. And this episode has a couple. So there's also Caroline Seymour, who plays Commander Torith, who has appeared before as a Romulan commander in the episode Contagion, and I think she also appeared in the episode, not the movie, First Contact, as one of the as like the scientist on that primitive world that Enterprise is making first contact with, and she's a good actor too. But it's funny because she played a Romulan commander in another episode, as I said, and they make it a different character, and it makes me wonder, why not just call the commander the same commander that she was in Contagion, and maybe even have a callback. Oh, I encountered the Enterprise before. I don't know why they invented a new character. Maybe they didn't realize when they were writing the script that they were going to cast the same actress, but once they did cast her, they should have been like, well, why don't we just call her the same thing we called her before? I don't know. But anyway, her performance is also amazing. The way she bounces off of Major Raquel or Deanna Troi really works, and it really sells like the high tension. Like, you feel the tension, you feel the suspense, like at every second moment you feel like Deanna's in danger of getting discovered and executed, and that's really comes to fruition in the end when they actually do like vaporize an effect right in front of her face. Like, that really, like, that was a brilliant stroke of writing, because it really pays off the danger that they're in, and it's a powerful moment to kill the character who's seen as extremely honorable, someone that Troi was really reliant on, and it also really raises the stakes that she has lost her crutch and she's been discovered, and it's such high stakes. Although I will say it was a little bit anticlimactic that the way they got out of it is the Enterprise was able to beam her out when the Romulan ship tries to leave. It seems like it should have been a bit harder than that to rescue her, but I mean, it's only a 45 minute episode or whatever, so they only have enough time. Only have so much time. But still, because of the rest of the episode was used very well. Like, there wasn't any moment where I felt like the episode was dragging or anything. I thought the pace was actually extremely good, and the high stakes, high tension involved was absolutely amazing. Now, this episode also, because the Romulans, and I noticed this a lot more, like, I kind of knew this, but it's really like bumping up to the forefront of my attention on more recent rewatches of The Next Generation, that the Romulans throughout the series was seen as a surrogate for the Cold War. Now, the reason why I never really thought of this before, because I think about Star Trek and surrogates of the Cold War, I think of the original series and the Klingons, which is clearly what the intention was in that situation. And in Next Generation, the Klingons became more of a post-Cold War relationship, metaphor for the United States and Russia, and how they're trying to struggle to be allies. Whereas the Romulans, but the original series, the Klingons were like the Cold War status in the 60s, which was a lot more high tension, a lot more high stakes. But I feel like the Romulans in The Next Generation, their analogy was more akin to the Cold War in the 80s, which took a bit of a different form than the Cold War in the 60s, and it wasn't as high tension, as high stakes. There wasn't things like the Cuban Missile Crisis, where a lot of the world believed that these two superpowers would actually destroy the world and destroy themselves. That threat was not as high in the 80s as it was in the 60s, but you still had a lot of high tension between the two superpowers, and it had more to do with espionage. And so this episode is definitely a lot more reflective than that, even though I believe this episode came out in 93, 94 after the Cold War ended. But it, well, not officially, but, well, officially I believe it ended when the Berlin Wall fell, which was 90, I believe, something like that. Don't quote me on this. But anyway, it was, or 89, somewhere. Anyway, point is, Next Generation started in the 80s, and so they continued this trend of a Cold War analogy even after the Cold War ended, because it was still fresh in everyone's minds. And this was definitely a reflection of that kind of espionage aspect of it. And it's done extremely well. And speaking of the Romulans, I think this is one of the best episodes of The Next Generation to actually flesh out the Romulans and humanize them and make them more of a culture. Unification is another really good one at that, although I don't think it was as good of an episode. Being honest, I had a bit more issues and it was too reliant on look at Spock than actually telling a good story. And this episode was a lot more put together in my opinion, but they're both examples of episodes that really fleshed out the Romulans beyond simply they're the bad guys, which I feel like the majority of the appearances of the Romulans in Next Generation were. They did come off as kind of two-dimensional, and they weren't explored as much, such as the way that Deep Space Nine explored the Cardassians or the Bajorians was done a lot better than how TNG explored the Romulans. But there were a few exceptions, such as this episode, which is one of the better ones, at really fleshing out Romulan culture. And because the whole thing takes place, or the majority of the episode takes place on a Romulan ship, and they're all, and Dan and Troy's pretending to be Romulans, so we're seeing Romulans interact with each other. And this also, of course, was the introduction of the Tal Shiar. It is a bit surprising to think of that they weren't invented before this episode, because now they seem such an essential, such a regular part of Romulan culture. It's hard to imagine a depiction of Romulans in Star Trek without them, but throughout all the original series and most of the Next Generation, they didn't exist. It wasn't until the 6th season of Next Generation that they invented the Tal Shiar. But of course, they would go on to be explored even more in Deep Space Nine and referenced in other stuff, like even Enterprise, I believe, referenced it, but of course Voyager and the newer Trek as well. Yeah, it is a natural. It does explore Romulan culture more, and it explores them more as a sort of not a free society, more of a military state, I suppose is the way you say. But it also is different than the Klingons because they actually have a Senate and a representation. Of course, it is, I believe, originally based off of more of a Roman thing, which is where the whole Senate comes in. But it does show how the Tal Shiar is kind of like the secret police, and how people spy on their neighbors and have them arrested or killed for simply speaking out against the state, which is unfortunately something we are seeing in current day Russia. So it could be modeled off of that model as well. Of course, you think Nazi Germany, another thing that definitely modeled off of that, just the crackdown on social freedoms, and at that everything that people just are not allowed to speak ill of the state. Also makes me think of modern day China. But anyway, so that was the way that the whole introduction to Tal Shiar really fleshed out the Romulans. Is why it became a staple, why I now associate it very commonly with the Romulans, because it really helps flesh out this whole culture and makes them different, makes them not just Star Trek is infamous for having, stereotypes as cultures, like Klingons are warriors, Vulcans are logical, Romulans are bad guys who are shady, but it sort of fleshes them out more and makes them less of a stereotype and more of a dynamic culture that is based in realism. So that also is amazing. Now, we also get a subplot in this episode involving a human who defected to Romulus several decades ago and has now changed his mind, seen the error of his ways, and involved in Spock's movement, but he surrenders himself to the Federation. You can see Worf's total disdain for him. Of course, Worf is prejudiced against Romulans. This is something explored in other episodes, and so it's just like a gentle reminder, and it's consistent for his character, so I do love that. But even Riker is very hostile. Everyone, even Picard a little bit, everyone's kind of really hostile towards him, which is fair enough. He defected to the Romulans. And the concept of a human defecting to Romulus, I'm a bit iffy on. Now, I know it's based off of, Americans defecting to the Soviet Union, which is a thing that happened. But I don't know if the analogy really holds, because it kind of in America, defecting to Russia is a bit of a different situation because they're all humans. They're all on Earth on the same planet. It's a bit different. We have an entire different alien species, and you go and say, I'm going to live with these aliens because I like them better. I mean, I suppose it's still possible. It's just, to me, it's kind of a bit different and more fantastical, maybe. I don't know, but I suppose I can kind of buy it, and I kind of wish that they explored this topic more, because to be honest, this side plot kind of seems like it's out of nowhere. All of a sudden this defector has appeared, and it seems like this kind of storyline deserved its own episode rather than just being a subplot of a better main plot. And so it felt underexplored and kind of just tossed in a little bit for me. But I did think it did definitely added flavor to the episode, and I do like Picard's interactions with this human defector, and how he, after living among Romulans for so many years, it was hard for him to readjust being with humans again, which is again something I can relate to with in a much smaller scale. But yeah, because I lived in New Zealand for 15 years. Now, granted, New Zealand's culture is very, very similar to America, but it is still a different culture, and it was a bit of adjustment after being there for 15 years and coming back to America and readjusting to American culture. But this, of course, would be on a much, 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 much bigger scale, having adjusted to living among Romulans to going back to living amongst the Federation again. But I can still kind of relate to it. But yeah, and I think that was a nice touch in how the way he was behaving. He's he had to, explain himself and be like, look, I'm sorry, I'm not used to this because I was living in Romulans, and Romulans usually do things this way, and Picard's just like, well, you better readjust. And he was actually helpful in sort of he was actually a good advisor to Picard, because when they were trying to track down the Romulan ship, he was giving them inside knowledge of how Romulans would react and how Romulan commanders would usually behave. So he was actually being helpful. But yeah, it did kind of feel like the subplot was kind of just tossed in there and wasn't as developed as it could have been. But hey, anyway, yeah, so overall, I thought this episode just really, really worked. So my rating for Face of the Enemy out of 10 is a 9. Excellent episode. It's a very, very strong 9 for me, almost a 10. But it doesn't quite reach that 10ness for me, but it is an amazing episode. As I said, the acting was amazing, the music was amazing, the way it's cut together was amazing. It was one of the most suspenseful, edge of your seat episodes. It was earned through the great character stories, through the great performances, and really fleshed out the Romulans in a way very few Next Generation episodes did. So definitely a landmark episode for the show, in my opinion. So that is it for my review of Face of the Enemy. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy, please leave a like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. But also, if you really want to support my channel, you can support me on Patreon, in which you'll be able to participate in polls like this and get pre-releases of videos like this 2 months in advance before I release it to the public. Your support at any level is very much appreciated. You can also, of course, support me by checking out my channel for more Star Trek content, as I cover all things Star Trek, also covering Strange New Worlds at the moment, as well as some other shows such as The Expanse, Better Call Saul, Star Wars Rebels, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.